Yeah, thank you all for coming. For those of you who have had a chance to hear me talk about media before, you may know that this is a great interest of mine, particularly, the intersection between Waldorf education and media, I think puts us at the forefront of education in approaching what will be one of the greatest challenges that face your children in their lifetimes. Kids today are growing up in a world in which the digital media and technology will play a part in their lives that we cannot even begin to imagine. The shift in the presence of media and technology in just the past 50 years is amazing. It's gone from a small percentage of households having television with a very small amount of programming. At one point in time, TV stations stopped, and then there was nothing on TV. Now, you can get on the internet and you can search and search and search and search and never come to an end or see the same thing twice. The amount of information and access to it is almost overwhelming. And for us as adults, we've grown up seeing this shift. To us, we adapt to each new piece of technology, and it's this slow growth. The frog placed into a pot of water as it slowly heats. And we adjust. And we find new ways to use technology, and we let it grow in our lives. And it makes us better at many things that we can do. Our children, your children, the children of our school, are coming into this fresh. And in the way that they interact with the media, in the way that they interact with technology, and in the way that it interacts with them, we still have yet to see how that will affect how they grow and change and develop. I thought over the last few days of how best to approach this. And I thought, well, if I'm going to stand in front of a group of adults and not students, and I'm going to talk about the media, what better place to go to learn about it than YouTube? And so I spent a couple of hours yesterday afternoon, actually I spent quite a few hours going through video after video after video, and finding that, as a matter of fact, not only is there an awful lot on YouTube, in case you haven't checked, you can just keep going. Not only that, but there's also some good information right next to some really not very good information. It's really interesting as an adult to take that on as a critical question, to watch a video and get to the point where within a couple of seconds you can tell, is this a credible source or is this fluff? Is this someone's project for a high school communications class, or is this an actual PhD professor presenting research? And they're both side by side. As adults, we've developed that critical capacity to decide which is which. Children, on the other hand, have not. To them, what is presented from one source is very much as credible as what is presented from another. I'll come back to this. But I did think I would start off with what I think is right about the middle of the road. I'll let you watch it and decide for yourself where you think this goes out.
.75% of the commercial network television time is paid for by the 100 largest corporations in North America. Some corporations have television budgets that range into the billions per year. Television producers compromise and end up mitigating their desires for those of the advertisers. Thus, television is effectively a private medium for their use only. The longer a person watches television, the more easily the brain slips into alpha level, a slow, steady brainwave pattern in which the mind is in its most receptive mode. Images and suggestions are implanted directly into the mind without viewer participation. An effective hypnosis is induced, and the viewer surrenders to the unending television image stream. Images of television violence stimulate the fight-or-flight instinct. But since it would be absurd to react to television violence, the viewer suppresses the emotion. Viewers are drawn back and forth on cycles of impulse and suppression. When the set goes off, this stored-up energy bursts forth in frantic behavior commonly associated with childhood hyperactivity. Television imagery is jammed together in a steady stream of information, fracturing your attention while condensing and accelerating time. These events would not happen in ordinary life. They are technical alterations only possible within the moving image media. Living in the rapid world of television imagery, ordinary life is dull by comparison, and often far too slow. People who immersed in the surrogate reality of television life deal on a daily basis with a reality totally unlike any that has preceded it. The image stream is a steady, mixed-up stream of real, unreal, and semi-real events. All of these events end up merging with each other and becoming just another set of stored imagery that have all similar reality values.
So, perhaps a bit tongue-in-cheek, but what I do think is, I think there are some really good points that are made there. And as I said, the importance of this is our ability as adults to question it. To look at that and know that portions of that, first of all, have bias. That all of you could tell by partway through that presentation what the bias of the presenter was. However, children don't operate in that way. They believe what we present to them. They take what our word is, or the word of any authority, including someone on television, because they believe that their parents have trusted them enough to take this person's word, that those things are real. One good point made in that video is that there isn't a distinction, particularly in the developing brain of a child, between what is real and what is not real. Santa Claus is a very, very real person to many children. That point at which he is no longer real is a crisis. Now, that crisis, of course, can be something that becomes more real to them. They would learn generosity. They learn new things. Learning to adapt and question and critically analyze media and its content will allow them to interact with the world in a new way. But how they get there is a whole different question. And to me, a lot of that has to do with what's going on while we're watching any kind of electronic media or interacting with it in computers or video games, as well as what's going on in the brain of children who are developing. For those of you who are in my class, they know I love the idea of the spectrum of development. And talking with Kate today, I decided not to go on the rainbow spectrum, but instead to just take it the color spectrum in general. When we talk about development, and I chose to work from birth to 14 because that's generally the age of children that we are talking about in this age at our school. And beyond 14, I would say that all of this continues, but in a slightly different way. To think a moment about what's happening from birth to 14, particularly in the brains of children. Children are born with more neurons active or possibly active than we continue to have as adults. The way you might think about it is as though the way our brain works is to have roads and highways. As adults, most of our brain activity, the neurons firing, are firing as though they're on superhighways. It's all 65 to 75 miles an hour, and you get point A to point B quickly. If I say 4 times 6, you can immediately tell me that that's 24, because that neural pathway is well honed, well trodden. That's here. Actually, that's about here. At birth, a child's brain is like the frontier. There are no trails, there are just trees. And to get from point A to point B, you might take any number of possible routes. You might go wander over by the stream, go check out that really cool oak tree, stop and watch the squirrels for a little while. All of it's happening at the same time. Now, as they're moving from birth, particularly to somewhere around 2 years old, 3 years old, all of that happens all at the same time. All stimulus is equal. The sound of a parent's voice and the sound of music are very closely similar. There's a tonal difference, and certain areas of their brain are starting to notice that difference. But for the most part, everything is about the same. The image of a moving picture on a screen and the image of a swaying cobra in their crib hold the same attention value. They will look at them, notice them, perhaps reach out. Maybe if they're the right stage, try and put it in their mouth. Right? All of these things are ways that they will interact with their environment to learn more about it. As they're moving through this period of time, up to 7, they're starting the process, and really it happens most notably starting around 7 years old. They're starting what's called myelinization. And myelinization means that we're taking those infinite number of paths through the frontier woods, we're starting to use the same ones a little more frequently. Now, using the same path the same time, over and over, as anybody who's spent any time in the woods, means that you're less likely to stumble over roots. You know where you're going. You might even be able to find it in the dark. And so, it means that travel is a little faster, a little more effective, and you're probably going to start to find that same route over and over again. All of the trees and all of the possible routes are still there. You could at any point in time veer off of one path and onto another. From 7 to 14, that's the highest period of time for this to happen in children's lives. And I'll come back to this, but this is a period of time in which habits are forming. Now, many of them have already formed by 7, but 7 to 14, boy, that's the time to really bring consciousness into forming habits. Because by 14, at puberty particularly, of course that's a different time for every child, it's all different along the spectrum, but at puberty, a hormone is released in the brain of every person, human being, that says that if that nerve pathway has not been myelinized, has not been walked on, that path has not been trodden, cut it out. You don't need it. You don't actually want it. Because we don't want people to go veering off into the woods. We don't want each of those thoughts to take a long circuitous path. We want direct point-to-point contact. We start putting up some walls on either side of the highway to make sure that those thoughts don't veer off. And by the time puberty hits, those places that weren't really used, boy, they're gone. Now, there's some really interesting things that happen through that brain processing that the media takes full advantage of. The first, and which starts off in this video, is the idea of creating commercialization. Training behavior patterns that will last the rest of children's lives, starting here. By showing that we as free citizens and all of the models that we see continually consume, and consume in specific ways. If you are this kind of person, you will like this. If you are this kind of person, you will like this. There's some really great car commercial out right now where the little kid is training his dad to be better, cooler, by knowing what to consume. It's an amazing training. Works on both sides. 2 target audiences. That's good marketing. And so, by training these habits towards consumerism, that's one way in which this is working. The other has to do much more with just the habit of physically what we do. What does your child want to do? That will be determined in many ways by the time they're 14 years old. In some ways, by the time they're 7 years old. Is it normal behavior to come home after school and sit down in front of some screen? Is it normal behavior to come home after school and go outside and play? Those are two choices. To them, from birth to 7, they'll learn this by imitation. They will imitate what you do. Birth to 7, if your child sees you spending a lot of time at the computer getting your work done, that's what they will see as appropriate. It's amazing how many little kids you see use a block like a cell phone. Really incredible. Not that they've ever used one, but they've seen all of us do it. It's normal behavior. Why shouldn't they? From 7 to 14, they're going to start to learn it first through imitation. They're going to start to appreciate what particular adults in their lives do, and then they're going to start to watch what their peers do. So by about here, about 12, we really have very little role at that point in time. We can set the rules, but if the habits aren't there already, boy, good luck changing that behavior at that point in time. So really, the work that we can do as adults in forming these appropriate habits and behaviors, according to what you believe is right to do, happens from birth to about 12, maybe. That gives us a little bit of time to get those habits in place. And like I said, not just habits of consumerism, but habits of what is appropriate behavior. That's a choice every single time. Some of you may know the American Academy for Pediatrics says that no child under 2 should watch screen time at all. None, 0. It's not productive in the least. Baby Einstein, it just doesn't hold up under actual research. But people don't necessarily see that in the same way. And there's a much bigger challenge that I'll get to a little bit later that has to do with how realistic is this? To really find all of those alternatives all the time. And the growing concern of, well, geez, are our children going to be ready to live in this world that they're going into? Moving through this period of time, too, to talk a little bit more about what goes on in the brain, there's something that happens that's also alluded to in the video when we watch particularly video imagery. Video imagery has gone from cuts when they were first television shows, cuts of a single scene were usually around 30 to 36 seconds long. That's about how long one cut was. Now, adult programming is to about 15 seconds. Children's programming is about 9. What that does is programs an attention span, as well as giving us a flood of imagery continually. Your brain doesn't know how to deal with that. We've spent millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years, however you like to believe human evolution has taken place, of our brains evolving to adapt to outside stimulus. And real-world outside stimulus, pre-1947 in the cathode ray, that stimulus happened slowly. Something that happened fast or loud was a cause for alarm. There's certain things that happen in the core of your brainstem that tell you this is a potential threat to you. You need to react. Your endorphins kick in, your adrenaline reflex comes up a little bit, your heart rate accelerates slightly. All of these things prepare you for possible threat. You don't want to get eaten by a tiger. All of those things still happen every time there's a flash of light on a screen, every time there's a loud change in music, every time there's a shift of set of scene. And if you start to watch carefully, particularly children's programming, that happens consistently. It's flash after flash after flash. It's loud music followed by quiet. Loud music followed by quiet. Everything back to Bugs Bunny. But boy, the more you watch current children's programming, the better and better they are at getting to do this. Because they realize that what that does is puts children into a particular state. On the one hand, their brain is telling them, I'm in potential danger. Your cortical steroids are building up. Your brain is really amping up. But there's something else going on. Because the flicker rate and the presence of soft, glowing light also changes how our brains operate. To take a step back, your brain essentially is working on multiple different wavelengths, frequencies of activity. And I'm going to identify quickly 3 of them. The first is alpha state. Alpha state brainwaves are associated with sleep and relaxation. The next being beta waves. And beta waves, they have to do with attention and awareness. And the last being theta. And these have to do with creativity. All right. Now, while you're watching soft flickering waves, some people say that this goes all the way back to the time in which the only artificial light in our environment would be a fire. And anybody who likes to sit by a fire knows that, boy, there is just an amazing thing that happens, a kind of relaxation that you can rarely get to outside of meditation. As a matter of fact, meditation, sitting by a fire, sleeping, and watching television are the 4 #1 ways to have highest level of alpha brainwave activity. It's these nice, slow, rolling waves, and we are amazingly suggestive. Hypnosis attempts to activate alpha level waves. Beta waves, those active waves, those are the ones that we're really using when we're thinking. If I give you a math problem, or ask you to go into work and solve a crisis, whatever that crisis is, a parent hearing a child, immediately beta waves spike. I need to deal with this. We all heard a child outside, and I would almost guarantee you that we all had a simultaneous spike where there was that, boy, we need to act. This, almost not present during media activity at all. There's no drive to activity. As a matter of fact, they're repressed. You sit there, you can feel it. When I turned on the video screen earlier, you could just feel people relax. Theta waves are associated with creativity. They're the hardest to activate consciously, except through meditative practice or prayer. Those are the 2 places where we find theta waves really coming into conscious activity. But if I give you a problem, for example, how will you go and change your media diet? Really start thinking about it. That's where the theta waves start to pick up. They're also extremely active in the creation of art, in the creation of music, and in dreaming. Those are the 3 places where we see theta wave activity just go crazy. But the alternate side of that is they can't really be that active when there are lots of alpha waves going on. So the more our brain gets into an alpha wave state, the less it can process that creative information. So if you are watching television and painting at the same time, it's unlikely that you are as creative as you would be. Or if you are watching something on a video, watching a tutorial, for example, while playing your instrument, there's probably a good balance of actual attention and this relaxation, but not much of your real creativity coming in. Now that's a really interesting contrast, because this relaxed alpha state, at the same time that the brainstem is getting all of that, oh my gosh, I might be in danger, puts your brain into what psychologists refer to as cognitive dissonance. It means that you can't really process what's going on. And so what happens is we just kind of start to shut down. And that's where you start to get that joke on the video, or the face that you've all seen in friends or children or whoever it is, where you've been in front of the TV a little bit too long, and you get that kind of glassy-eyed stare. You don't really know what you're watching. You can't really remember the middle part of the movie. You know it might have been kind of good, but you probably have lost a lot of it until someone else reminds you, and then you can bring it back up. The third way that I'd like to talk about the effect of media, and then I want to move on pretty quickly from there, is in that creation of habits as well. And this has more to do with video games and to some extent computer programs as well. And that has to do with a structured and processed presentation of information. And not just information, but choice. And I'd like to give that as kind of an example. You take a child and you put them, particularly if you take, say, 2 or 3 children, you put them outside, any age, and you give them nothing. You leave them for a little while. A couple stages they might go through. First, bored. That may not be first, but for some kids it will. I'm bored. There's nothing to do. Now, that asks you, will you entertain me? Let's imagine for a moment we're not there. We're just watching. I'm bored. What are we going to do? Eventually, one of them will start to come up with an idea. But it's unlikely in a group of 3 children that that one child's idea will be the entire game the entire time. It might be. Some powerful children can kind of get everybody on board with their game. But usually, partway through that game, one of the other kids says, "Oh, yeah, and now let's do this." And the game starts to shift. And that third child says, "Oh, well, I'm going to be this." And now the game is going in all different directions. It's completely changing, completely altered. It might take into account what's in the environment, some sticks, a tree, some rocks. It might not. That kind of creative play is one of the healthiest aspects of brain development possible, because if you imagine that forest that their brains are at that point in time, they are just running through the trees. They're all over the place. Let me take that same group of 3 children. We're going to place them in front of a TV with an Xbox. Throw them some controllers. Here's the pattern now. I know what this game is. I played that game already. I'm really good at it. Let me show you how. That other kid, who maybe doesn't know how it works, follows up with, "Well, what if we do this?" And the video game answers that for you. You die. Your game's over. You can start again, try that process again, because what you're learning through that, what habitually is forming on a neural level, as well as in a Waldorf education we would refer to as well as in their etheric body, is what they're learning is that you need to do things in a very specific way. And if you figure those things out, and the path that you're supposed to take, set from somebody way up here, then you will succeed. If you know where the warp zone is, or know the special code to get a little bit further ahead, then it's okay to cheat. If you have a little bit of extra money, you can buy the cheat codes, or if you know the right place to look for it. And that then becomes what makes it enjoyable. What makes it enjoyable is getting further by knowing the right way to do things. Now, there's a value in that. There is. All of us need to know how to accomplish certain specific tasks. But the question is that what you would like your children learning as a habit in their young life? Would you like them to learn that their future problem solving is something that they should approach with creativity by finding new solutions, or by attempting to work out what is it that I'm supposed to do? And I'll tell you that in my classroom I would prefer the former and not the latter. I would prefer for them to be coming up with those creative solutions. And to some extent you've said that that's what you prefer. You've come into a school in which that's really what you're looking for, I would hope. And that brings me to the next part that I'd like to talk about a little bit. And that's what this has to do with. This is all a pretty traditional outside perspective on brain development and the effect of media. But I'd like to go a little bit further than that. And I'd like to talk about what it means from a Waldorf perspective to have media influence in your children. And for that, I'd like to talk about 2 things that we really put a lot of value on. The will and the imagination. And I would say that if there are 2 goals of Waldorf education up until 8th grade, it's the development of the will and the imagination. I don't know that I can speak for everyone, but I can say that for me, those are the 2 capacities that could serve the greatest. And there's a lot of levels to that, and I can't get into all of it today. I will say that there is a spiritual scientific level to which both of these are crucial in children as well as adults. But there's a really practical level as well. To start with the imagination. Imagination really does have to do with how we are approaching possible solutions. To give you a sample of an 8th grade lesson, you might start a Platonic solid lesson in the 8th grade by saying something to the effect of, I'd like you to imagine for a moment a physical object. And that physical object has every edge the same length, and every corner, every vertices, the same angle. And on this figure, which is floating in the air around you, you can turn it around in space, you can watch it turn it in 3 dimensions, and you can see that every single edge is the same, every single corner is the same. And if I tell you that there are 4 sides, can you draw that for me? Can you make it for me out of a piece of clay? If I tell you that there are 6 sides, can you do the same thing? In an 8th grade student, I would expect that without hesitation they can. Or certainly, and I'll come back to this one too, the next day, I would certainly expect that they can. After a night to process, to sleep, to take it into their dream life. This is the imagination. It's the ability to take something that is just pure concept, talk, thought, and bring it into the real world, is bringing imagination into the will. The trouble with imagination and media is that every time you see a video image or a picture image of something, it just stops your brain from trying to come up with it on its own. It stops your spirit from trying that. It's an amazing thing to talk, to read a book to a child if before or after they've seen a movie. In my class we've been reading the Chronicles of Narnia. Fabulous book. Just amazing. And the visual imagery, it's pretty subtle. He doesn't get into a lot of long description. This is no Tolkien, but the story is beautifully done. Afterwards, Mrs. Humes, one of our teachers here, asked my students to make a faun, which is a character who comes up in the books. And it was really interesting to see the kids for whom the book imagery was their sole input. They came up with these really varied forms. They all looked pretty different. They all had different attributes. They started making up stories. 2nd graders make up stories about all of their figures, of who their faun was, what they did, what kind of stuff they could do, why this faun had a longer tail, why this one had a walking stick. Some of the students who had seen the movie, they got really fixated into some really particular fauns. Most notably, the battle faun. If you've ever seen the movie, and I would hope that maybe some of you have, it's not a bad film. There's a shot at the end. In the book, the last battle of the first book of the Chronicles of Narnia is pretty glossed over. It doesn't really go into much detail about what happens. In the movie, as you might imagine, you can't do that. The battle is elaborate. It's like a 12-minute sequence of CGI monsters smashing each other. It's amazing. And there's these battle fauns, and man, they're cool and they can fight. And what was really interesting was to have these kids say, this one is a battle faun. He has this weapon. He does this. And that's where their story ends, because that's where their imagination of that character ended. He ended with that 30 seconds that they saw the faun run across the screen with that weapon. And suddenly, all of the possible ways through the woods were closed to them. Every time that imagination is supplanted by an image that is pre-produced for them, it is exceedingly difficult to pull ourselves back out of it. If I tell you that that figure that I described to you earlier was a tetrahedron, a triangular prism, or a cube, you know what it is. If I showed you one while I was describing it, you wouldn't take the effort of figuring it out on your own. The engagement of the imagination just doesn't happen so much when we can shortcut it with the computer. The same is true with the will. The will is that ability to take something that we think might not be a bad idea and make it happen. It's going from picturing the cube to really making it with precision, or anything else. I've had great ideas for businesses, everybody does, but I I've never made one of them happen. I hope that somebody in this room who's an entrepreneur actually did. And that, to me, is a remarkable feat of will. I'd take my hat off to you if I had one on. That will is the other thing that we really want to develop in children. The ability to take an idea or concept and see it through. To pay attention to what the parameters are and figure out their own path and to make that happen. And that's a rare thing, especially when they have to come up with the creativity to do it. And again, the challenge with the will is that when you're presented with habits that say, don't worry, we'll have immediate gratification to this. If you don't like what's on TV, just keep clicking until you do. If you don't find the answer that you want on Wikipedia, that's okay. Search 3 pages down, you'll find it. And it will require almost no effort on your part. It will be brought to you. That's a hard thing for kids who we really want to learn that they have to work for some things. We want that. But that's hard to develop when what they're presented with is a concept of immediate gratification. It's fun to watch TV the moment you turn it on. It's great to watch a movie as soon as the credits roll. You know, I'd say by now I'm programmed that if I hear that 20th Century Fox music, I just smile. I love movies. But I also know that while I'm doing that, I'm unlikely to be making anything happen, and maybe my love for movies is why I never did start a business. Who knows? So every time we develop the habit of watching more television, of spending more time on the computer, we ask children not to engage in their will. And that's a choice that they're making time after time after time. And it's hard to build that up. And so every time we work with these things, we try to develop them. Your teachers really work hard at these 2 things. This guy is incredible. Katie's so great. I know that there's a gallon man in the other room as well. All right, what a perfect imagination of the concept of equivalence in measurement. Perfect. Here's this person, and 4 cups is 2 pints. Yeah, that makes great sense. All of these things. That kind of imagination really comes to life. We tell beautiful stories that plant these deep, imaginative pictures in children's lives. But like I said with the tetrahedron about happening the next day, there's this piece. That piece has to do with sleep and dreams. And I said in theta level, this creativity, that happens when we're dreaming in meditation. We need that as Waldorf teachers. We need your children's dreams. We need them to make these pictures become the concept. We cannot present this gallon man, he's really cool and a great picture, but that as a picture doesn't mean anything as a concept unless it works through their dream life. And that's why sometimes you'll have a teacher who says, well, we'd like to let them sleep on it. Or maybe you've asked a teacher to do something and they say, well, I'd like to sleep on it. It's why you may have heard teachers talk about how we teach in a 2 or 3 day rhythm, depending on the age of the children. We present material, usually a story, on the first day. The next day, we remember it. And the children will bring in details that we never gave them. All the time. These great descriptions. They'll go on and on. It's amazing. And then on the 3rd day, or 2nd day if you're in the upper grades, on the 3rd day you can start to say, well, what does that mean? And they get it. They just get it. You don't have to take the concrete explanation. The challenge in there is the dreams are important. The sleeping on it is important. It's a digestive level of theta wave activity in which they're processing information from their day in a new creative way to become part of what they conceptualize in the world. And without that time in sleep, and without those images going into their sleep, it just doesn't work. If they go to bed that night and what they saw right before they went to bed was an hour of television, when they go to sleep, their brain has already been put into alpha state with a whole bunch of images coming with it. When they fall asleep, they carry those right in with them. And when their brain does reach theta level, poor Gallon man, he doesn't stand a chance. No way. You put Gallon man up against Yu-Gi-Oh? Forget it. He just can't hack it. And so, you've chosen to put your children into our school. You've chosen to put resources behind that. You pay money for this experience, for Gallon Man in your child's life. Every time your child goes to sleep, having undone some of that work, you've really not only eroded the work that's being done, but you've essentially devalued your own investment. You've taken away the chance for that to work deeply in your child. And that's one of the things that really, when we talk about media in education, particularly in the young child, that's what we're asking for. When your teachers say to you, when we mean no media, we don't really just mean not talk about it in class. That's not what this is. Yes, that's practically often the reality. But the reason we're asking you that is so that you can help us make this work. Help Gallon Man. He'll be your hero. And how great is it if he's your child's hero too? How wonderful an experience to give them that. Now, the flip side of this, and I'm going to wrap this up very quickly because I really want you to have a chance to do some talking too, is that we are presented simultaneously with a great challenge. The same thing I started off by talking about. Your kids are going into a world that we can't even imagine yet. They already are all more media savvy than any of us were at their age, of course. They all know things. If you hand an 8-year-old a cell phone, they can figure it out. That's incredible. You know, there's things that I feel like I need to work to process that they're just coming to automatically. They're used to being flooded by it. Their entire world is inundated by media messaging, billboards, radio, television, cell phones, video games, everything, all the time. Walk through a mall and just try and tone it out. It's impossible. Drive down the street, notice how many places you see it. That's the world they're going into, and they need to be ready for it. And not only that, we need to be ready to have them be able to not only interact in that world, but really work in it creatively, to bring their will and their imagination into that world, to make it work for them, to make it work for everyone, to find the positive aspects of how they're going to interact with it. And that's a challenge that we, not only we as a school, but we as a Waldorf movement, we as an American culture, have really not faced up to yet. We haven't really figured out yet, how do you create a healthy balance in a developmental way for children to be able to not negatively affect their development at early ages, to be able to create a social awareness for the effects of media, but also that by the time they hit adolescence, and it's such a huge part of their life, that they have a working knowledge of how to critically evaluate it. I would hope that when your children are 14, they can do the same thing that I did on YouTube. I hope they do. I hope they flip through those videos and just look at them and say, nope, 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 nope. That one could be valuable. I hope they can look through websites because they're not going to be going to encyclopedias. They're not going to be doing book research. As a matter of fact, probably their journal research will also be on a computer by the time they get there. But will they know the difference between getting their information from a scholarly journal or getting their information from somebody's posting on Wikipedia last night? And what that difference is and how it plays into their lives, that's what we need to be developing as well. And we as a school need to know how to do that. So what I ask is that for the rest of the time that we have in this, that you all work together, parents and teachers, to try and figure out a way or ways, or as many of them as we can come up with, to help our school to become part of that forefront leading edge of our movement. To become conscious of how we approach media, not just, please don't put it on children's lunchboxes and t-shirts, but way bigger than that. How do we approach developmentally the awareness of media and the exposure to it in the same way we do reading, math, music, handwork, the arts? How can we approach media in that same way so that the kids are going to come out with a good understanding of it, and so that we can really get parent support when we ask them from birth to 12 maybe, please don't have this a part of your child's life. We need that balance, and that's something that we can't do without opening a good dialogue about it. So, with the remaining time that's left in the meeting, and I understand there were several different possible times that were presented, what I'd like to ask is to have some smaller groups form so that we can have some time to talk about it. And what I'd like you to ask, or to kind of center the discussion around, are a couple of questions. What is appropriate media for small children, and what is appropriate media for older children? And how does that get bridged? And I'd like that conversation to happen with both parents and teachers. It'd be interesting to hear what those different perspectives might be. That's the first piece, and that's kind of the philosophical, where do we stand? The other piece is the practical. How can we make this work? As parents, what can you do or share with each other that makes it a real way that you can ask your child not to watch media? How do you handle those family events where everybody else says, well, wait a minute, why can't your kid sit down and watch a movie? How do you get some time as an adult to have a little peace and quiet without using the TV as a babysitter? What's appropriate media content? And how do you control that in your children's lives? Share some of those practical pieces, because boy, you need to support each other in it. And right now, there's not much of a forum for that. So please enjoy the rest of the time. Know that what you're doing is really good work. I would love to hear of any suggestions that you have. I'd also like to let you know that the administrative faculty of our school is currently working on our media policy, and that any input that you can give us would certainly be helpful in our conversation. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for your openness to the idea. What I'd like to ask is that if the